everyone, I'm Katrina Walter from Oliphant and I am a knitting teacher and designer based in Sydney in Australia. And if we haven't met before, welcome to my YouTube channel, but if you have been here for a while, welcome back. So I have a tutorial for you today on how to do a 3-needle bind off. And we'll come back at the end and I'll have a chat about what they're actually useful for and why you'd want to use them if you're interested in that. Alright, so a 3-needle bind off is a technique that both seams two pieces of work together and binds them off at the same time. And so what you're going to need for this are 2 different pieces that still have live stitches that haven't actually been bound off yet. Usually at some point during the process, you will have put these stitches on a stitch holder. So the first thing to do is to put the stitches back on your needles. And the other thing that you need is a 3rd needle, which is where the name a 3-needle bind off comes from. Now, you do want to have 3 needles that are the same size, but if you don't have that, it's really important for this needle, the one that isn't holding the stitches, to be the same size as the needle you were using to actually work the piece. And if you do need to use a 3rd needle that is smaller, use that to hold some of the stitches. Don't use it to do the actual knitting. What you want to do is hold the right sides of the pieces together. So you take your spare needle and you insert it into the first stitch on the front needle, like you're going to knit, and then insert it into the first stitch on the back needle, also like you're going to knit. And then you take your yarn and you just wrap it around like you're going to be knitting, and you knit the 2 stitches together. And after you've done the first stitch, you'll have a loop here on the right hand needle. So take the needle in your right hand, insert it into the first stitch on the front needle, and then the first stitch on the back needle, knitwise. Wrap the yarn around like you're going to knit, and then pull it through both loops. So this loop and this loop. And so you've knit those 2 stitches together. And so after you've done the second stitch, you insert either of these needles, it doesn't matter, but I find the front one easier. You insert this needle here into the second stitch, the one at the back, and you pull it over the top. Slip it over. Okay, and then you just keep repeating that down the needles. So again, take the tip of the right hand needle, insert it knitwise into the first stitch at the front needle, and knitwise into the first stitch of the back needle. Wrap your yarn around like you're going to knit, and then pull it through the loops. So you knit those 2 together. Pull these off, and then take one of the left hand needles, insert it into the second loop on the right hand needle, and pull it over the top. So you just keep doing that all the way down the row. And usually, depending on what you're making, but a lot of the time, you don't end up doing this over a large number of stitches. So it can be a pretty quick process. So I'm just going to go ahead and do all of these, and then I'll show you what to do right at the very end. Okay, so let's say we're getting to the end of the stitches that we need to do the 3-needle bind off over, and your pattern will tell you how many stitches you need to bind off, because it doesn't always necessarily ask you to bind off all the stitches. So let's say this is the last stitch that you've been told to bind off. All you do is you cut the yarn, and then you just feed it through the loop like you normally would at the end of a bind off. So that's our 3-needle bind off here. And the reason that you want to be holding the right sides together is because this seam is quite visible, like it makes a very visible seam. So if we go ahead and turn that inside out so that we can actually see the right sides, You can definitely tell that the seam is there, but it's nice and neat, and that's what it looks like. Okay, so now that we know how to do a 3-needle bind off, I just wanted to quickly let you know what they're actually useful for and why you'd want to do one. Most commonly, it's used for seamless garments that are knit bottom up, and it's used to do the shoulder seams. So this jumper that I'm wearing, for example, the way it was knit is that it was knit in the round until the underarms, and then you work the front and the back separately, flat. And so what happens when you're doing that is that when you get to the shoulders, you have a section on each side that become the shoulder seams. And you have that section on the front and the back pieces. And those stitches that you have, you don't bind them off. You just put them on a stitch holder. And once you're done with the front and the back pieces, you essentially have 4 sets of stitches. So a left front and a left back, and a right front and a right back. And you turn the piece inside out and you do a 3-needle bind off across the 2 sets of shoulder stitches on the left and on the right. Then the other thing that they're often used for, at least what I often use them for, is in tandem with a provisional cast on, which is a technique that I will make a tutorial for in a couple of weeks. And whenever that is up, I will make sure to put a link to it here in the corner. But a provisional cast on is a cast on where the stitches that you cast on actually produce a set of live stitches that you then do something with at the end. And so what you can do is that if you have a piece where at the end of it you have to seam the cast on and the bind off together, you can do a provisional cast on and then leave the top stitches live and not actually bind them off, and then fold the thing in half and do a 3-needle bind off across all of the stitches. So I have a shrug pattern that's coming out soon that I will link to when it's up, and in that you actually do a provisional cast on the bottom and leave the stitches live at the top, and you fold it in half and seam along what becomes the underarm stitches. And so yeah, it's just a way of avoiding having to do regular seaming, but I wouldn't say downside. One thing you just have to keep an eye out for with 3-needle bind offs is because they are actually knitted together, it's not sewn together, they can stretch out over time. So for example, there is a pattern that I knit a while ago that's called Tallulah that has a very long shoulder seam, and they actually build allowance into the pattern for the fact that that's going to stretch over time. And so they tell you to knit the sleeves a little bit shorter because unfortunately at the end of the day, as much as we hate seaming, everyone hates seaming. Okay, maybe not everyone. As much as a lot of us hate seaming, seams do actually provide structure. And so if you do something like a 3-needle bind off, it will stretch over time. And so that's just something you have to keep an eye out for. So yeah, I hope that was helpful, and if you ever run into a 3-needle bind off, then now you know how to do one. But if you did quite like this and you want me to make more tutorials, just let me know in the comments below, and hit the like button, and subscribe if you would like to follow along with me. I put out new videos on Thursdays, and so I will see you next week, but until then, happy knitting!